When it comes to harems of the past, we usually think of beautiful women who belong to Eastern rulers. Even the word harem comes from the Muslim world and means the women's quarters of the house, where entry is forbidden to everyone except the master. However, the phenomenon of the harem is much older. Powerful rulers of ancient Egypt also loved to surround themselves with beautiful women who were available to them. The harems of the pharaohs were very different from their later Eastern counterparts. However, they also played an important role in the history of ancient Egypt, becoming a source of constant conspiracies and palace intrigues. In this episode, I will talk about how harems were organized in ancient Egypt, who was taken there, how the pharaoh's chosen women lived, and how influential they were. My name is Semyon and I declare the How They Lived section open. Let's begin. The role and status of women in ancient Egypt. I want to start by talking about the role of women in ancient Egyptian society, because without understanding this aspect, the story would be incomplete. Besides, this topic is simply interesting because the status of ancient Egyptian women was in many ways unique for its time. Women in ancient Egypt held a very high status compared to other advanced civilizations of that time. Egyptian women had rights that Assyrian, Greek, Hittite, and later Roman women could not even dream of. Women in ancient Egypt enjoyed almost equal legal rights with men, which was unprecedented for that time. They could inherit and bequeath property, enter into contracts, file lawsuits, and testify in court, and register children under their own name. Egyptian women could move freely around the country without a male escort, manage households, and handle finances. Women had the right to demand a divorce from their husbands. Many historians believe that such a situation was a remnant of matriarchy, which was still strong in the Nile Valley. The main responsibilities for ancient Egyptian women were, of course, motherhood and managing the household. But if they wished, they could freely work, rise to prominent positions in their careers, and attain important positions in society. We know about high-ranking, proud female officials, heads of large enterprises, and managers in the palaces of the nobility and even pharaohs. There were many women among priests, doctors, and craftsmen. Moreover, during Egypt's nearly 3,000-year history, women became its rulers several times, either as regents or as pharaohs. Many Egyptian women were skilled in reading and writing. What bears this out? Numerous texts on clay shards which served as a substitute for expensive papyrus. Records have been found about children, cooking, making clothes, and other everyday issues. Modern scholars believe that most of them were written by women. An important piece of evidence of the high status of women in ancient Egypt is the intimate correspondence that has come down to us. It is full of tenderness and shows love and respect for women. It is full of idyllic scenes and moments of family life depicted in sculptures or frescoes. Here, men are often depicted embracing their wives. Poems that ancient Egyptian poets dedicated to their beloveds have also come down to us. There are even love stories where the main character goes through many trials to win over his beloved. It can be said with confidence that marriages for love were not considered unusual in ancient Egypt. And all this is despite the fact that, for example, in the same states of Mesopotamia, women were almost in the position of domestic animals, had no voice, and were completely dependent on their father or husband. As for the institution of marriage itself, the usual form of marriage among Egyptians was monogamy. Cases of polygamy were also known, but they were rather rare exceptions. A man had the right to have, in addition to his wife, several concubines, but only very wealthy people could afford this. Courtly debauchery in ancient Egyptian style. A man in ancient Egypt usually had one wife, since keeping concubines was expensive. Obviously, this was not a problem for the pharaoh. That's why the rulers of Egypt had huge harems, often consisting of hundreds or even thousands of beautiful women. It should be said right away that the pharaoh's harem can only be spoken of in a rather conditional sense, because it was not at all like the classic women's hive that later rulers of the East had. In ancient Egypt, we are dealing more with an association of the pharaoh's wives and concubines who served not only for the ruler's sexual pleasure, but also performed important functions in the life of his court. It can also be said that the harem in ancient Egypt was a place or places where the women of the royal family lived, the pharaoh's mother and wives, his daughters, sisters, and favorites. Here, they not only enjoyed entertainment but also received upbringing and education and engaged in arts and crafts. Unlike its later Eastern counterparts, the ancient Egyptian harem was a relatively open place where women freely received guests and could leave its walls. It also had other functions. For example, the ancient Egyptian harem was the pharaoh's weaving workshop. The large female community that lived with the ancient Egyptian pharaoh was subject to strict rules and had a rigid hierarchy. At the top of this pyramid was the ruler's main wife, who was also the great queen and the great royal consort. She wore the royal diadem with a cobra, a symbol of supreme power. The great queen accompanied her husband during court ceremonies. She herself, as the companion of the pharaoh, was considered a goddess. Together, they symbolized the harmony of the masculine and feminine principles in the world. It was the sons of the chief wife who were the heirs to the throne. Only if the chief queen could not give the ruler an heir, or if they did not live to see the transfer of power, could the son of one of the secondary wives or concubines who received the title of mother of the pharaoh claim the throne. Although this may sound quite wild to a modern person, the chief wife of the pharaoh was often one of his closest relatives, a sister or even a daughter. For example, the wives of one of the most famous pharaohs, Ramesses II, were two of his own daughters. The Egyptians believed that such marriages preserved the purity of the sacred royal blood within the family. The next most important woman in the ancient Egyptian harem was the pharaoh's mother. She held a special title and was by no means always the main woman of the previous ruler. One step below were the other wives of the ruler. There could be several dozen of them. Even lower were the royal daughters, then the sisters and aunts of the pharaoh, and only after them the concubines and favorites. However, even the most insignificant inhabitant of the harem enjoyed significant privileges. She had her own servants, was provided for as promised, and even after death had her own tomb, which was something far from every Egyptian could boast of. The concubine did have duties, but it's hard to call them burdensome. The girls prepared theatrical performances and dance routines. They delighted the pharaoh and his courtiers with singing and music. Concubines were also involved in court ceremonies and religious rituals. It should be understood that there were many royal harems in ancient Egypt. They were located in all the rulers' residences and in the largest cities of the country. This was undoubtedly convenient for the pharaoh. On trips, he didn't need to take his wife with him. In literally every city, well-groomed beauties awaited him. Wives who had grown old or simply bored the ruler were sent to distant harems. In theory, any woman could become a concubine of the pharaoh, provided she was beautiful and charismatic. It was not uncommon for daughters of chiefs from friendly or conquered tribes of Egypt to end up in the harem. In this case, they became a kind of hostages in major political games. For many of these girls' children, such a turn of fate was a real lucky ticket, because Egypt was considered the most advanced state of the ancient world, a recognized center of art, science, and fashion. Roughly like France in Europe during the reign of Louis XIV. However, most of the concubines were Egyptian. Getting into the pharaoh's harem was considered a stroke of luck and a great honor. First of all, it was prestigious. And secondly, it gave the ruler's chosen one the opportunity to provide for herself for the rest of her life. A girl was even luckier if she became pregnant by the pharaoh. The lucky woman instantly rose in social status as she became the mother of a potential heir to the throne. Of course, very few could actually claim power, but the kings of Egypt tried to provide the best possible life for their children and their mothers. Now, about the organization of the Egyptian harems themselves. The main one was located next to the pharaoh's palace and was part of it. Formerly, its head was the ruler's first wife, but she was hardly personally involved in managing such a large and complex household. Several male administrators were assigned to the harem, who probably managed the establishment. There were also scribes, servants, and guards on staff. Interestingly, there were no eunuchs in Egyptian harems. Either the pharaohs trusted their wives and concubines too much, or they simply didn't pay attention to the inevitable affairs. The second option seems more realistic to me. Eastern harems were famous not only for the beauty of their inhabitants, but also for the sophisticated intrigues and conspiracies that constantly arose within them. For example, in the late Ottoman Empire, the harem had such a serious influence on state policy that foreign envoys began to take advantage of it. The Sultan's favorite wives appointed and deposed viziers, killed legitimate heirs, and conducted diplomatic correspondence. According to many historians, it was the involvement of the Sultan's favorites in politics that became one of the main reasons for the decline of the Ottoman Empire. In ancient Egypt, things apparently never went that far. However, even the pharaoh's favorite harems caused them quite a bit of trouble. What can you do? Idleness and a bohemian lifestyle have always had a bad influence on people. One of the most famous conspiracies organized by the forces of the Egyptian harem was the attempt to overthrow Pharaoh Ramesses III. Moreover, historians still argue about how it ended. The conspiracy was led by Tia, one of the ruler's wives. She wanted to kill her husband so that her son would gain power. Many high-ranking state officials supported the women's conspiracy. At first, the conspirators resorted to the use of magic. When that didn't work, they tried to kill the pharaoh during one of his visits to the harem. Ramses was wounded, but he managed to escape from the treacherous trap. There are several versions regarding the events that followed. According to one of them, Ramses III died the next day from his wounds. His younger brother ascended the throne and conducted the investigation. The investigation quickly identified all the participants in the conspiracy. They were captured and brought to trial. A papyrus with records of the court sessions has survived to this day. Another version says Ramses survived and punished the conspirators himself. Their noses and ears were cut off, then they were exiled to the gold mines. Tia was not among the convicted. Perhaps she managed to escape. Only recently have scientists been able to solve this 3,000-year-old mystery. The study of the pharaoh's mummy helped with this. Without any doubt, Ramses III did not die a natural death. He was simply killed with a knife. Marks from a sharp knife or dagger remained on the pharaoh's cervical vertebrae. Further examination of the skeleton using a CT scanner showed that several people most likely took part in the attack. Most likely, the first conspirator killed Ramses with a blow from an axe or hatchet. The pharaoh's toe was cut off, and only then was his throat slit. With the death of Ramses III, the era of ancient Egypt's golden age came to an end. Instead of an epilogue, findings by archaeologists and written sources eloquently tell us about the true nature of harems in ancient Egypt. I think there will be more archaeological discoveries in the future, and we will learn even more about the events of those distant years. Well, for now, thank you for watching, and be sure to write what you think about such harems. Goodbye, everyone.